At 5:18 a.m. my phone buzzed on the nightstand and tore me out of the kind of sleep that doesn't want to let go. The subject line on the email said, in the kind of bland office voice that never belongs to good news, "Benefits approval, WIC EBT." It thanked me for applying on behalf of my household, listed my full legal name, and told me to pick up my card at the Kroger on New Bern Avenue. It also listed an infant, unnamed, with a birth date 10 days old, and called me mother. The house where I read that sat 2 blocks off Glenwood Avenue in Raleigh, a 1940s bungalow with a porch so shallow it could only pretend to be a porch. The front room held a sofa that sagged like an apology and a bay window that filtered winter light into the yellow that looks like denial. The kitchen had the usual triangle of sink, stove, fridge arranged just wrong enough to make you open the wrong drawer 3 times. I ran a small business from the detached garage, slow, patient work that kept my hands busy and my head from wandering. I stripped paint from old doors, rebuilt sash cords for divided light windows, patched wrought like a dentist with wood instead of enamel. When weather or cash flow discouraged me, I listed vintage hardware on Etsy and eBay and explained to strangers in messages that yes, the spindle fits a standard American mortise, and no, the screws were not tampered with, they had aged like everything does. My husband, Eric, wore his job like a passport. He was a flight attendant based out of Atlanta, commuting from Raleigh with the stubbornness of someone who believes airports exist to make his schedule possible. The app that ruled his life was called Crew Access. Shifts floated through it like fish in a tank, easy to watch and harder to catch. He liked to say nights suited him, and he meant overnights, the kind where you fall asleep in a Spring Hill Suites in Omaha and wake up in Tampa wondering why the coffee tastes like a secret. He collected schedules the way he collected hotel key cards, obsessively, carelessly, equal parts memory and habit. We had been married 5 years. People used to ask when we'd make the house child-ready, and I would smile like my teeth were closer than they felt and say we weren't in a hurry. 2 summers ago, a urologist off Six Forks Road showed us numbers that held a story neither of us wanted to read out loud. The room smelled like antiseptic and carpet that had seen a lot of shoes. He used the kind of nouns that flatten you. We left with pamphlets that said options like they were handholds, and drove to Pullen Park and watched the paddle boats come and go because motion felt like something you could own. Money has the kind of gravity every adult recognizes. It pulls even when you want to float. The furnace died in January with a cough like a failing engine, and we took an emergency install with a 12-month promo that turns sharp if you blink wrong at a calendar. My van, an aging Transit that hit its age mostly well, developed a shift hesitation on the belt line that made me sweat in a way spreadsheets never could. A small melanoma scare last year required a biopsy. Insurance did its dance and paid most of it, which meant the rest arrived in a plain envelope and waited with the patience of a bill. None of this was dramatic enough to call family about. It was a faucet that dripped no matter how you jiggled the handle. So the WIC email made no sense and also told a story I felt in my ribs. I stared at the lines until the words grew fuzzy and the kitchen light clicked on inside my skull. The email listed a pickup PIN and a case ID. It listed a secondary contact phone number I did not recognize and a mailing address that split in two, ours on Wade Avenue and a second one on Peachtree Street in Atlanta. It also listed a grocery store orientation time stamped for later that morning. I took screenshots. I forwarded them to my business account with the subject line 518 WIC. I wrote the time with my finger on the screen like that would make it matter more. I woke to the smell that still felt like love most days. Eric had the hospital clean scent that clings to people who live in aircraft cabins, coffee, industrial soap, recirculated air. He had worked a sequence with a red "I back to ATL" and a deadhead to RDU if you believed the schedule he had shown me last night. His uniform hung on the back of the closet door, his tie draped over the knob in the way. He insists is intentional. I could have set the phone down and made coffee and told him, softly, that the state of North Carolina believed we had an infant somewhere. I could have asked why. I could have asked who. What I did was print. I slid the email to PDF, saved it under a new folder named with the date and 3 letters that meant nothing to anyone but me, and then printed the page from my laptop to the laser printer that lives like a roommate under the dining table. The printer made the usual municipal sound like it was chewing paper into facts. The kitchen smelled like day-old coffee grounds and the faint citrus cleaner I had been too tired to rinse last night. I looked out at the driveway where my van sat like a patient dog and made a list on the back of a sash: weight receipt, WIC call, Peachtree address, crew access logs, bank, camera. Lists carried people like me through water that's just a little higher than we'd like to think. The first call goes where bureaucracy tends to send you. The WIC office on New Bern put me on hold and then told me a case had been opened by a field coordinator based on a hospital referral. The mother's name matched mine, and the father's name listed a man who lived in Atlanta, a surname I did not recognize. They had an SSN for me that was correct and a birth date for an infant 10 days ago at Northside Hospital, Atlanta. They suggested that sometimes mothers use a maiden name for the hospital and a married name for benefits, and perhaps the second address was a relative who could pick up vouchers if travel made it difficult. They sounded helpful in the practiced way of people who have to believe the world mostly behaves. Crew access showed an overnight sequence that ended at 7:06 a.m. with a deadhead seat to Raleigh landing at 8:51. Eric's phone had pinged twice at 1:17 a.m. and 3:38 a.m. and the notifications came from the airline's scheduling team. The app logs don't look like much, but you can read them like rings in a tree if you stare long enough. He had traded a Charlotte turn for something that routed through Atlanta and back. The system recorded the change at 10:19 p.m. I remembered that I had fallen asleep to the hum of the dishwasher around 11. I remembered that the lights on the porch had gone off at midnight and come on again at 2 to 7 a.m. Our camera is not a fancy one, not a fortress with cloud integration. It's a Eufy 2K that saves to a micro SD and pings your phone with resolve whenever a car backfires. I pulled the card, slid it into a cheap reader, and scrolled. At 2:04 a.m., the screen showed Eric on the porch holding a flat box and a plastic bag with the kind of pharmacy logo that manages to look cheerful in any light. He tucked both under his arm and walked down to the street. At 4:41 a.m., the camera caught him back again, a blur in the dark, letting himself in with his key like someone who belonged. The flat box sat on our hall table until the morning sun turned it into a rectangle of evidence I could not open without asking a question I was not yet ready to hear answered. By 9, I had driven up to the Kroger just to see something touchable. The WIC counter sat near customer service, behind a thin plastic panel that made voices sound like they were coming from inside a fish tank. The clerk asked for ID. I gave it. She slid a card toward me and asked me to sign the back. She said I could buy formula, baby food, and certain cereals. She pointed to a laminated sheet with brands circled. I asked whether anyone else could pick up on my behalf. She said an authorized alternate could. She read the name on her screen, L. Whitley. The surname looked like a story my mouth didn't want to shape. I took the card and felt like a thief. It's embarrassingly easy to make a person doubt their own eyes when love is involved. When Eric woke, I showed him the Kroger card and the email. He rubbed his eyes like a man who has been asked to build a bridge in his sleep. He said he had an explanation, and then gave me a version I could have written myself, that a coworker in Atlanta had needed a safe name on a form so she could get an appointment without her ex knowing that systems confuse people more often than we think, that he had put my name as a placeholder and had meant to fix it and had failed in the chaos of back-to-back turns. He asked me to believe his intention. He asked me to believe the lack of malice. He asked me to beat back my mind from making the most dramatic version, which he said I had always done when numbers and timing scared me. I did not accept or refuse. I opened Truist on my laptop and set a hard flag on our HELOC that required in-person signatures. I opened an Ally Online Savings we had used as a bucket and moved a chunk into a separate checking in my business name. I froze my credit at Equifax and TransUnion. I wrote the case numbers in a notebook with a carpenter's pencil that smudged the numbers enough to feel real. EQFR-990 2214 TUFR-556,309. I placed the WIC card in an envelope and wrote boundaries on the outside because I needed to see the word. The first independent witness dropped into my day with the casualness only strangers carry. I was picking up a sheet of tempered glass at a shop off Capitol Boulevard when the owner looked up from the counter and asked whether I was the one who'd left a diaper box in their dumpster last week. He said it like a neighbor, not a scold. He said a man who matched Eric's build had carried a box with a shipping label addressed to me, care of Peachtree Street, and broken it down with the efficiency of someone who has done that exact thing many times. He had found the label and thought I should know it had my name on it, after all. He slid the label across the counter like a dealer in a game I did not know the rules to. The driver had signed with a squiggle that pretended to be a name. Once you start, the drumbeat becomes predictable in its cruelty. A package from Northside Hospital arrived, addressed to me, containing a bill that used the phrase guarantor and listed the baby's date of birth. The father of the baby section named a man whose last name carried a hyphen that ended in Eric's. The bill used my insurance information. I called our plan and asked for the authorization logs for recent claims. The woman on the line, who had likely heard every variation of panic, said a pre-authorization had been approved for a delivery under my name's plan with the subscriber as Eric and the patient as a person with a different first name but a last name that tied to the Peachtree address. She asked if I wanted to file a fraud claim. She gave me a reference BCBS NCFR-40 3195 and told me to send copies of any documents that might help their investigators, who, she said, were thorough but slow. At this point, a version of me would have made it private, like a wound taped under a shirt. I did the opposite because paper mutates in kitchens where only two people look at it. My mother hosted a cookout on Saturday in Apex, a strung-light backyard party with folding tables and those aluminum trays that turn anything into banquet. Cousins came. Neighbors wandered over. Someone's child knocked over a lemonade and cried like the world had ended. I brought a manila folder because I wanted witnesses, not referees. I waited until people started refilling their plates and then laid out the WIC email, the Kroger card, the diaper label with Peachtree spelled in nasty black dots, the North Side bill, and a printout of the crew access swaps that showed a sequence change at a time that made the ring clip into more than coincidence. I kept my voice as if I were reading instructions to hang a door. Eric said, calmly at first, that I had misread documents. He said hospital billing departments create family trees where none exist. He said he had helped a coworker for 1 week. He said people list names on forms to get through doors that would otherwise stop them. He said the infant had nothing to do with me. My aunt asked whether I had considered the reputational harm of accusing a husband in front of family. My brother told me this looked like a misunderstanding, the sort that you deal with in private, the sort our grandparents would have solved with a conversation instead of a folder. The neighbor across the fence, a woman who handles HR for a grocery chain, asked if she could see the pre-authorization number. Her face tightened in the way of people who see patterns for a living. She suggested quietly a DNA test if I had any reason to believe I was being drafted into a story against my will. Eric's mother, who has a voice that commands bedrooms and Sunday school rooms with equal authority, asked us not to make a scene. Seeing the papers on a tray next to the potato salad made her eyes water. She said she did not recognize the title of any her son's actions as malicious. She said we needed to have faith in love, not documents. She told me she trusted me to do the right thing, which sounded like a gift and a trap. Eric threw away a plastic cup with more force than necessary. A cousin watched, silent, the way people watch storms they want to film and also want to escape. Boundaries must be spoken aloud so the air can hold them. I froze our joint visa. I stopped the automatic payments that had lived on it like moss and moved them to my new account. I called Truist, put a note in a file with a case ID TRC-77,122 that no draw on our HELOC would be honored without both of us, in person, with ID, and signatures witnessed by a manager who had shaken our hands at least once. I wrote Eric a letter, not an email, because paper has teeth. I told him he was not to place my name on any benefits or forms for any child. I told him I had scheduled a DNA test at a LabCorp on Six Forks for Wednesday and Friday, slots held, check-in codes written in my notebook, court admissible if we found ourselves navigating that path. I wrote that failure to appear would be treated as refusal. I wrote that we would live like roommates until we could speak the same language on paper. I placed the letter on the hall table next to the flat box with a pharmacy logo. I took a photo of both. The storage unit betrayed us next. The sticker on the spare key in Eric's backpack looked like nothing until I stared at the logo of Midtown Mini Storage off Wake Forest Road. The woman at the desk recognized the last name and pulled up Unit 44C under my name with a secondary contact listed as L. Whitley. The unit smelled like baby powder and bleach and a specific brand of milk formula I recognized from the box in the dumpster label. Diapers lined one wall like a kind of fence. A clear bin labeled bath held tiny washcloths, baby shampoo, a little hooded towel with a fox on the corner. A blue silicone sippy with a mountain pattern sat upside down on the shelf to dry. A printout from an app called Tadpoles lay on the bottom of the bin. It had my email as father and a password reset sent 2 days ago to a Yahoo address not mine. The floor was swept cleaner than you'd expect. People make their second lives tidy. Lena, another coworker of Eric's, whose name I knew only because he had said it once in the tone that betrays history, appeared as a name on a pediatric clinic's after-visit summary we found in the bin. The clinic sat off Glenwood, 2 miles from our porch. The summary listed a 2-week checkup for an infant named with a last name hyphenated with Eric's, the primitive kind of hyphen someone believes will make the world gentle. My name, again, served as guarantor. The note at the bottom read that immunizations would be covered under my plan. I tucked the paper into the folder and wrote the date at the top of the page like a bookmark I did not want to keep. The next public scene was less planned and more like a door falling off its hinges. Our neighborhood HOA held a pool opening in June, one of those Sundays where kids cannonball and adults pretend that hard conversations can be made soft by hot dogs. Eric stood under the pergola telling a story about a difficult passenger. I waited until the board president finished a speech about pool rules and then raised my hand. It sounds ridiculous even now. I presented to the crowd's gathered impatience the truth of what paper had taught me: the WIC email, the storage unit lease, the pediatric clinic bill, the LabCorp appointments, both unattended, the insurance pre-authorization, the neighbor's ID of a diaper box, the Eufy clip timestamps aligned with crew access swaps. I asked whether anyone else there had ever been added as a proxy on a newborn's chart without being asked. It was cheap theater, and I knew it. The humans present did what humans do. They shifted. They avoided eye contact. They stared. They looked down at their hands as if answers might be printed there. It should have embarrassed me. It did later. Right then, I needed the sound of other people's silence to counter the sound of his certainty telling me that I was inventing storms. Eric called it cruelty. He said I had humiliated him. He said I was turning a problem of kindness into a performance. He used the word generosity like a shield. He told me that my hard edges would be the thing that ruined us, not anything he had done in a city 2.5 hours away. The board president asked if this should be taken offline. A neighbor I had waved to 1,000 times said, softly, that kids were listening. One of the board members who works in compliance at a bank and is allergic to mess said we would all feel better if the paperwork could be reviewed by someone whose job it was to look at it. I said that had already begun. The airline came next. I am not the kind of person who wants to involve an employer. I am the kind who wants the world to behave without dragging anyone into a room they didn't pick. But someone had been logging his car into ATL's employee lot at times that did not agree with the stories that had been told in our kitchen. A ground employee we knew from a holiday party checked off whose car goes in when. He texted me that the lot had seen Eric's plate at 6:10 a.m. on a day he was allegedly sleeping between sequences in Raleigh. Another coworker, a gate agent with a friendliness that masks a nerd's attention to detail, sent me a photo of the fob logs for the crew lounge entrance. Eric's badge tapped in at 11:58 p.m. the night the hospital recorded the pre-authorization. I printed them and added them to the folder. The folder made a sound when it closed that I hope I never hear again. There is a point at which a person must hire a lawyer because letters without letterhead carry no weight when rooms get crowded. The firm on Fayetteville Street smelled like old carpet and new coffee. The attorney wrote down an internal reference number that felt like ballast, RPFAM-20,112. She advised a cease and desist to Eric regarding the use of my name on benefits and medical proxies, a letter to the insurance company declaring fraud, a letter to the state's WIC office to remove my name and open a separate case for the infant with the correct guardians, and a request for a temporary order requiring a DNA test if any paternity claim were to be made. She told me to open a new account if I hadn't, to freeze my credit if I hadn't, to change every password I had ever loved. She wrote those crossed T's with a pen that made a sound my bones recognized as adult. I slid the cease and desist across our hall table and left the house to do a job on Oberlin. The client's door had 27 coats of paint layered like history. I planed the bottom, filled the gouges with putty, sanded, primed. The work makes a quiet that grows a different part of me, the part that can be alone without reaching for a rectangle of light. My phone blinked anyway. Truist called to verify a DocuSign request to draw $28,400 from our HELOC for medical expenses urgent, signature attached. A key recorded from a network that matched an apartment complex on Peachtree. The DocuSign logged in under an email address one character off from mine. The bank set a fraud marker and gave me another case number TRFR-33310. I set my sander down and realized I had stopped breathing for a count that would have made a yoga teacher worry. The DNA test day came and went like a joke. The LabCorp receptionist checked a list, looked at me with sympathy, and initialed the refusal form in a square that carried more weight than I thought it could. I stood in the parking lot and asked the kind of question that Jesus did not answer and lawyers do. Would you demand the test now and risk pulling a life raft out from under a 10-day-old? Or would you wait and let your name float on paperwork until a court forced clarity and your credit bled in the meantime? Would you call Child Protective Services and feel righteous and nauseous in the same breath? Or would you wrap a boundary around yourself and keep moving with a hole where certainty used to live? I did not know. I know people like to type certainty in these stories. I had none. There are details I have not put into the record of myself because they make me look childish or weak. Like the Tuesday night the pediatric clinic posted a photo to its public feed of babies in fox hats, faces blurred, and the corner of the frame caught a blue silicone sippy with a mountain print. Like the Thursday morning I watched Eric drive to the storage unit with a look on his face I had not seen since our early days, the tender, taut one he reserves for things he has decided to love. Like the way my heart spat a PVC rhythm when my van hit a pothole on Oberlin and I had to sit in the driver's seat while old tears arrived like new water. My doctor, who lives in fluorescent light and speaks in thoughtful sentences, told me the heart sometimes stutters under stress and the way through is ordinary: water, sleep, less caffeine, fewer screams. She affixed a Holter monitor to my chest with medical tape that smelled like school nurse rooms and asked me to bring back 48 hours of my life as data. I wore it to a meeting with a client and pretended not to notice it when it itched. The airline HR rooftop meeting should have been about ratios and burnout. It became a place where my folder met fluorescent light with witnesses whose names would appear in minutes if someone asked. I stood in a room with 10 chairs and a ficus that had accepted its fate long ago. I told the HR director my husband had used my information in ways that could cost me actual money and maybe criminal exposure. I showed her the logs. She printed me a letter that said, plainly, that on X dates and Y times, Eric was not on the premises and had swapped his shifts. She wrote it without adjectives. She did not raise her eyebrows. She handed it to me across a table that had seen less awkwardness and more donuts. I put the letter into the folder on top of the refusal form. The weight felt like a kind of proof my bones could stop arguing with. Eric said later that I was burning down a house to swat a mosquito. He said the child was not his. He said he had been a friend to someone who needed to cross a river where the bridge had been removed by a man who kept checking her location. He said he had placed my name where it would be respected and then planned to remove it once the danger passed. He used the word temporary as if it didn't contain entire seasons. He used phrases like "I intended to," as if intention can make paper less sharp. He told me that the world didn't line up for women unless a man pushed a few things into shape. He made me into the villain because he needed a villager to hold blame while he played hero. We separated slowly because that is how houses end most of the time. I moved into a one-bedroom above a bike shop on Person Street. The apartment smelled like chain grease and basil from the pizza place next door. The bed came with the place. I brought my sheets and my kettle and the folder. The bike mechanics downstairs laughed like people who get to talk loudly all day and mean it. In the morning, the light hit the floor in a rectangle that moved so gently you could forgive it for making you feel something. I took calls from the corner near the window because the cell reception there cooperated. I made lists and then ignored them. I sanded a door while crying and then sanded it again because doors don't care. The aftermath did not snap into place. The WIC office took me off the case and opened a new one with the correct guardians. The insurance company suspended benefits associated with the baby until, their fraud review completed, they stopped asking me to pay. The storage unit was closed under my name, reopened under another. The Luxor One locker in Atlanta stopped giving boxes with my name on them. The P.O. box application that had popped up in my email, yes, there was one, of course there was canceled. The airline wrote an internal memo about ethics and proxy forms and the misuse of employee family benefits that made the rounds, with exactly the impact corporate memos always have, none publicly, a lot privately. My folder grew dust on its edges where my fingers didn't grip. I found out about the baby's name from a hospital congratulations card accidentally mailed to our house. It had a photo of a knitted cap and a sentence about sleep. The last name included Eric's, hyphenated with a woman's. I held the card over the trash and then did not trash it. I slid it into a drawer, which is where Americans put things we don't have the nerve to place anywhere else. I thought about whether I owed the child anything beyond my refusal to be a name on paper. I thought about whether truth would help him 10 years from now when forms matter and men in rooms ask questions about how he got his last name and why. It is easy to punish adults by using children as leverage while telling yourself you are being principled. It is also easy to forgive adults by telling yourself you are protecting children. We are not divorced. We are something with a hyphen. He lives in the bungalow. I live over bicycles. He brings cashier's checks to pay the mortgage. I deposit them without noting the handwriting. He keeps my last name in his mouth when it suits him. I keep his out of mine. He sees whoever he sees. He posts photos of airplanes and sunsets and coffee. He never posts a fox hat. He texts when something breaks in the house that my hands know better than his. I send him numbers for contractors who will do good work and not steal copper out of the attic. We are civil because the opposite is exhausting. We are also not kind. If you are waiting for the part where I say the DNA test happened, I have to tell you that it did not. The woman sent a letter through a lawyer that said I had no standing to request a test for a child I did not claim. The letter was correct. My lawyer said we could fight, but it would cost the kind of money you spend when you are buying time instead of winning. I saved the letter. I wrote the case number on the side. I stopped refreshing the lad's portal. I decided to hold my life steady and not draft myself into a battle where the highest likelihood outcome is everyone bleeding. There is a final image in my head because my brain is sentimental and will not be wrestled into submission by a file folder forever. It is 5:18 a.m., and my phone's rectangle of light makes the ceiling into a blue-scale version of our room. The email subject line says benefits approval. I can hear the faint beeping of a grocery store scanner in the background of my imagination, the way it says yes, yes, yes in a voice that belongs to machines. I see a blue silicone sippy with a mountain print sitting on a shelf to dry in a storage unit someone kept cleaner than my own kitchen. I hear a stamp land on a piece of paper in a WIC office, a sound so soft it could be nothing except I know what it does. Some mornings I stand in the bay window of my apartment's front room and watch commuters pull out of their quiet spots and wonder how many of them have had their names used as tools and how many of them should be sorry and aren't. I wonder whether I did the right thing by asking for tests that never happened and by refusing to be draftable and by not picking up phones that would have let me be the sort of mother I had once imagined I would be. I wonder whether there is a version of this where I show up at a pediatric waiting room with a folder and a soft voice and introduce myself as the woman who chose not to stand in the way of a life getting its measurements. The sun hits the floor and moves an inch. The mechanics downstairs raise the gate. The city makes its small morning sounds. A machine somewhere stamps another piece of paper, and somebody's life becomes official with a thud you can miss if you are not listening for it.